To a new saltwater aquarist, it can feel like there are 1,000 things you have to get absolutely perfect in order for your tank to be a success. Whereas in truth, when you understand the hobby, it is a lot more simple than you first thought, and you come to recognise the red herrings you fixated on as a newbie that no longer matter to you. So today I'm going to run through my top 7 reefing red herrings, and it starts right now. First up is slow coral growth, and it's easy to assume you are failing in the hobby if your corals hardly seem to grow for months on end. But some corals take time to settle and just need an extended period of foreplay before they let you have the good stuff. It is of course always worth making sure your water parameters are there or thereabouts and that you have sufficient flow and light for your corals. But more often than not, chasing growth will actually do more harm than good, and letting your tank simply find its groove is usually better. This SBS coral did next to nothing at first and took 2 years to get to this stage where it was roughly an inch across. Fast forward 12 months and without any intervention from me, it became one of the biggest corals in my tank. And in order to keep it in check, I now have to give it regular haircuts. I remember those days. Next up is having a pristine sand bed. When you start a new aquarium, the sand bed is one of the prettiest parts of your tank, and it's only natural to want to keep it looking clean. But keeping a sand bed clean is a lot easier said than done. There are various critters that will help to some extent, but the reality of them is that most will make little to no difference, and others will simply pile up your sand in places you don't want them to. And apart from the fact that sand is almost certain to get dirty with algae over time, when you turn up your flow to the level your corals require, the sand bed becomes one big dust cloud. So don't fret about getting your sand bed perfectly manicured when you first set up. I promise it won't stay that way anyway. Number 5 is coralline algae. If you set up a tank with white dry rock, it can look pretty unappealing until it's covered in the only algae anyone actually wants, gorgeous purple coralline algae. And among other benefits, the presence of coralline algae is a good indicator that your tank is ready to support stony corals. And while experienced reefers still see the benefits of coralline, many can take or leave the stuff. If it spreads onto your glass, it's very difficult to scrape off, and it can cover and clog up your weir box and even your live rock. And when it starts to grow quickly, you can end up with an absolute ton of the stuff, at which point, like anything in the hobby, it starts to feel like a pest. And as pretty as it is, it's not as pretty as corals, which is ultimately why we're all here. Now most urchins will eat coralline algae, which might sound bad to you at first, but when you've seen how effective an urchin can be at eating pest algae, you won't mind him nibbling on your purple bits as well. Next on my list of reefing red herrings is worrying about your tank when one coral dies. In the wild, corals can live for hundreds of years and theoretically even forever, and they're incredibly resilient animals and don't just die for no reason. So when one coral dies in your tank, it's natural to want to establish the cause. And to be fair, it's always best practice to carry out a suite of tests when a coral dies to make sure all is well. But, as survivable as corals are, sometimes they die in our tanks for reasons we can't establish when everything else is fine. So if your test results more or less check out and the rest of your tank looks good, there is no need to start a full inquest or even worse, make a raft of changes to try to prevent further losses. More often than not, your attempt to fix one problem will create several more further down the line. First on the podium is corals looking a bit ropey in the first 6 months. If you ask 10 different people when you should add your first coral, you will get 10 different answers. But one universal truth is that corals often don't do well in a new tank. And new tanks simply need time to establish themselves. Whether it's nitrate and phosphate levelling off, good bacteria spreading, various types of algae competing for space, or any of 100 other biological and chemical processes we can't see or test for. And corals don't enjoy the instability and competition that happens when you first set up a tank. And because of that, it's easy to think they need your assistance to pull through. But the opposite is often true. Those processes are part of establishing a healthy environment that can support marine life. And your well-meaning efforts to help corals by changing your lighting spectrum or intensity, dosing trace elements, or adding coral food will often only serve to delay the establishing process, or even worse, throw it off and introduce more changes for your corals to cope with. If your corals don't look great or don't grow for months at a time in a new tank, they're probably just in survival mode, waiting for conditions to settle so they can thrive. Corals are patient animals, a valuable character trait often not shared by reef keepers. And the runner-up is LED lighting spectrum. Gone are the days when reef tank lighting adjustability was simply limited to on or off, and LED lights give us control over every imaginable aspect of lighting, including 50 shades of blue. Should I decrease the length of time my lights are on? Is blue light better for corals than white? Do I need moonlight? Am I wasting my time with a light that doesn't have true UV? Are all questions you won't hear pro reefers asking themselves. Most LED lights come with templates the manufacturer will recommend for your particular tank type, and you'll get the most joy by simply choosing that, turning the intensity down by half so as not to bleach your corals, and walking away from the app. If you don't like the way the templates make your tank look, just turn all the blue and purple channels up to 100%, then adjust the white lights until it looks good to your eyes, and lower the overall intensity down to 30 or 40%. Decreasing the green channel by 3% and increasing the indigo by 7% is not the solution to all your problems. And while the on-off functionality of old school lighting isn't sexy, there's a reason experienced reefers still swear by T5s and metal halides. And the number one thing pro reefers don't care about that newbies do is what are often described as pests. Asterina starfish, bristleworms, brittle stars and most types of algae can strike fear into the hearts of new hobbyists. And the first sign of bobble algae, colonial hydroids or Aptasia anemones can be enough to make you think your tank is on the verge of a hostile takeover from an unstoppable enemy. But most experienced reefers recognise that conditions that suit corals also suit various other kinds of marine life that we just happen to find less aesthetically pleasing. Now, no one wants a tank full of Aptasia, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't take action to deal with undesirable pests. It's just that the overwhelming majority of critters we hobbyists call pests are in reality simply minor irritants, or just as likely something that will live alongside our lovely corals just fine and don't warrant an immediate smashing of the panic button. Now, pro reefers of course have the advantage of years of experience to differentiate between the impending doom of dinoflagellates or zoa-eating nudibranchs and a harmless albeit unusual looking stomatella snail that will just help keep your tank clean. But really the message of this video is that chasing perfection isn't the way to success in the hobby, and constant interference on your part is almost never the answer. Now, I'd love to know what reefing red herrings you've discovered, so let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next week, and until next time, happy reefing.